Choose your new mother from among 5 noble women, but the prince's son chose the cleaning lady. Before we begin this beautiful period love story, tell me in the comments where you are listening to this beautiful story from. I love to know where you are joining me from. The palace was quiet, but it was not peaceful. It was an oppressive silence, as if everyone was careful not to breathe too loudly so as not to cause gossip. Claire Dubois lowered the bucket carefully, without making a sound. The stone floor of the hallway was cold, and at that hour the north wing seemed forgotten by the world. Better that way. When the palace became nervous, the hallways became dangerous for people like her. "Quick, Claire, don't leave a mark," the butler had told her at dawn without looking at her. "Yes, sir," she replied in a low voice, as always. She didn't ask why. At Versailles, asking questions was an elegant way to get into trouble. Even so, from the murmurs that reached the service area, Claire already knew what everyone knew. The princess consort had died suddenly, and mourning had spread throughout the palace like a damp blanket. There were candles, black cloths, and bowed heads, but there were also hidden smiles, furtive glances, and conversations that changed tone when someone of higher rank approached. Claire clutched the rag and carried on. It was not her place to express an opinion or mourn in public. Her job was to leave everything spotless, as if grief could be swept away. When she turned into a small room, she heard voices behind a half-open door. The chancellor's voice was as dry as paper. "His Highness must think of France." Another female voice, soft and firm, like a fan closing. "France is thinking of your Highness, Chancellor, and of the heir, especially the heir." Claire stood still, not out of gossip, but out of instinct. Sometimes it was safer to stop than to continue. If they saw her pass by, they could accuse her of eavesdropping. If they heard her breathe, they could accuse her of existing. Prince Etienne's voice responded with restraint, as if each word were difficult to utter. "My wife has not yet been buried with dignity, and already they want to talk to me about replacements." "It's not about a replacement," the chancellor said quickly. "It's about continuity. She's a mother," the woman added, "and the child cannot grow up without a mother figure. The court is restless. The people will ask questions." The prince let out a brief, joyless laugh. "Let them ask whatever they want. I'm not going to bring a woman into my home as if I were changing a light bulb." The woman moved closer. Her tone became sweeter, more dangerous. "Your Highness, no one is asking you to change a light bulb. You are being asked to protect your lineage. Or do you want others to choose for you?" Claire knew that voice. She hadn't seen her up close many times, but she didn't forget her. The Duchess of Blair was one of those people who could smile while pushing someone to the edge of the abyss. The Chancellor insisted, "Alliances are at stake, Your Highness. Letters from Vienna, letters from London, stability." "My son is not a treaty," said the prince, and this time his voice trembled a little. There was a silence. Claire swallowed. Her throat closed up with pure nerves. Then the Duchess spoke as if she had already decided the outcome. "Let's do it cleanly. Let's make it final if the prince does not choose the heir." Claire blinked. The child, the Chancellor, did not hesitate. "It's brilliant, Your Excellency. If the people see how the heir chooses his new mother from among noble ladies, no one will be able to accuse the prince of favoritism or capriciousness." The Duchess finished. At that moment, the door burst open. Without thinking, Claire moved away toward the wall and lowered her gaze. A maid hurried past carrying a tray. No one noticed Claire, or if they did, they pretended not to. It was the same thing. When silence returned, Claire slowly exhaled. She didn't understand politics, but she did understand children. What she had just heard sounded like cruelty disguised as ceremony. She continued cleaning. She forced herself to think about the floor, the stains, the shine, simple things, but the palace would not let her rest. Later, in a corridor near the storerooms, Claire heard small, hurried footsteps as if someone were running without wanting to make a sound. Then ragged breathing and a body trying to hide. Claire stopped and looked up slightly. There was no one around, only the pale light coming through a high window and the echo of that crying. "Hello," she said very softly. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Claire took 2 slow steps, as one would when approaching a frightened animal. Then she saw him, A boy crouched behind a piece of furniture covered with a cloth. His hair was neatly combed, but already tousled by his hands. His clothes were fine, too fine for that corner. And his eyes seemed tired of being looked at. Claire knew who he was without anyone telling her. The heir, Luis. The boy looked at her and tensed, as if expecting a scolding. Claire raised her hands, showing that she was empty-handed. Don't worry, I'm not here to tell on you. She paused. I'm just cleaning. Luis didn't respond. His lips trembled. Claire swallowed. In the palace, people spoke of the boy as if he were a symbol, a title with legs. But there, in that corner, he was just a child with his heart in his mouth. Claire crouched down at a safe distance. If you want, I'll leave, she said. Just nod your head, like this. He nodded slightly to show her that he did. Luis looked at her, confused. He didn't agree. He didn't disagree. He just looked at her as if waiting for the trap. Claire reached into her apron and pulled out a clean, simple cotton handkerchief. It wasn't fancy, but it was useful. She spread it out in the palm of her hand and asked him, Do you want this? It's not fancy, but it's good for drying tears and blowing your nose without it stinging. Luis stood still. Then slowly he reached out and touched the handkerchief with his fingertips, as if checking that it was real. My mom, he finally murmured, so softly that it was almost inaudible. Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to say so many things. She wanted to say she was sorry, that the world was unfair, and that adults didn't know how to care. But she held back. Saying too much might scare him. Yes, she said. Just your mom. Luis clutched the handkerchief, and his eyes filled with tears again. Not anymore. It doesn't smell anymore, he whispered. And then he broke down. Claire felt her eyes well up, but she didn't cry. Not in front of him. She moved a little closer, just enough for him to know she wasn't alone. Do you want me to stay here? She asked. I won't touch you if you don't want me to. I'll just stay. Luis took a deep breath. Then he nodded very slightly. Claire sat down on the floor as if that corner were a church pew. It wasn't proper for a maid, but at that moment she didn't care. She sat still, her body relaxed and her gaze lowered, so as not to invade his space. The boy cried silently, as if he had been taught that crying was shameful. Claire dug her fingernails into her palm to keep from crying, because if she cried, he would feel guilty. They sat like that for a few minutes. Then Luis asked, almost without a voice, Did you lose your mom too? Claire froze. She hadn't expected that. She felt an old pang, a shadow. Yes, she replied slowly, a long time ago. Does it still hurt? Claire exhaled. Sometimes yes, sometimes not so much. I always remember her, she thought. Luis squeezed the handkerchief tighter. I don't want to forget. You won't forget her, Claire said without hesitation, even if they ask you to. Luis looked up quickly. They asked me to smile, to say hello, to be brave. Claire leaned forward slightly. And what do you want? Luis opened his mouth, closed it, and finally said, I want them to leave me alone. Claire felt a surge of anger, not against him, but against all those who squeezed him as if he were a ribbon. It's okay, she said, watching her tone. They'll leave you alone here. No one is watching you here. Luis looked at her as if it were a miracle. At that moment, distant footsteps and voices could be heard. Luis, Your Highness, where are you? Claire stood up suddenly without making a sound. She looked at the boy. They're looking for you, she whispered. Do you want to stay here, or do you want to come out with me? Luis shrank back in fear. I don't want to, he said. Claire thought quickly. She couldn't hide the air, but she could help him leave without being dragged away like a package. Then come with me, but act as if we just met, she said. You walk slowly like a prince, and I'll follow behind like a servant. No one will think anything of it. Luis hesitated. And if they scold us, I'll tell them I found you and accompanied you. That's all. No one will scold you if they see you walking as if nothing happened. Luis swallowed hard and with effort, wiped his face with his handkerchief. Then he nodded. Claire carefully opened the door in the corner. They stepped out into the hallway. Footsteps were approaching. A guard turned the corner and saw them. His eyes widened and he exclaimed with relief, Your Highness, we were worried about you. Luis lifted his chin as high as he could. He said nothing. The guard looked Claire up and down as if she were a piece of furniture out of place. "And you?" Claire gave a brief curtsy. "I was cleaning, sir. I have found the young prince and accompanied him back." The guard watched her for another second. Then he leaned toward Luis. "Your father is waiting for you." Luis clenched the handkerchief in his fist. Claire noticed. His fingers were white from squeezing so hard. Without thinking, Claire whispered, "Breathe." 1, 2. Luis took a deep breath. They walked a short distance. When they reached an intersection, Luis turned to look at her out of the corner of his eye. He didn't say anything, but his gaze asked a question. "Are you going to stay? Are you going to disappear like everyone else?" Claire looked down as she should, but she gave him a small gesture just for him, an almost imperceptible nod. Luis seemed to calm down a little. When they parted, Claire went back to her work. Her hands were shaking, but she kept going. She had to keep going. Later in the kitchen, another maid gave her a nervous look. "Where were you, Claire? They were looking for you, son." "Me?" Claire frowned. "They say the Duchess is watching everyone." The maid lowered her voice. "They say the Duchess is bringing 5 ladies for the boy to choose from." Claire felt her stomach drop. What she had heard at the door was not a rumor. It was reality. "And why would they be looking for me?" she asked, though she already suspected. The maid shrugged. "Because they saw you near the heir. Because the great always think the worst." Claire pressed her lips together. She wanted to say that she had only helped him. She wanted to say that it wasn't a crime. But in the kitchen, words also had hierarchy. She simply picked up an empty tray. "I'm going to the storeroom for soap," she said, to cut off the conversation. "Be careful," murmured the maid. Claire walked away with the tray as a pretext. The hallway leading to the storeroom was busier than usual. There were staff running around and butlers giving orders. The whole palace was preparing for an event that no one wanted to mention aloud. As she turned a corner, she almost collided with the head butler, a man in an impeccable suit. He did look at her, and when a man like that looks at you, it's because he wants you to feel his weight. "Claire Dubus," he said, pronouncing her last name as if testing its value. Claire lowered her head. "Sir, I need to be assigned to the main hall corridor tomorrow," she said. "There will be a lot of movement." Claire looked up slightly. "Sir, I don't usually know," he interrupted her, "but that's how it was ordered, and I don't want any mishaps." "Understood." "Yes, sir." The butler bowed a little more, lowering his voice. "And don't forget your place. It's for your own good." Then he left. Claire stood with the tray in her hands, feeling her heart pound. For your own good. That phrase always meant the opposite. That night, when the palace was half dark, Claire returned to the north wing. No one bothered her. It was late, and the nobles were asleep or pretending to be. As she scrubbed a secondary hall, she heard small footsteps. Again. Claire turned around. Her heart skipped a beat. Luis was there, standing in the doorway, alone. His eyes were red and his face tense. Claire looked down the hallway in alarm. "How did you get here?" she whispered. "They'll come looking for you." Luis took 2 steps forward. He wasn't crying, but his silence was even more unsettling. "They told me they're bringing 5, he said awkwardly, as if he were ashamed. 5 ladies. Claire swallowed. "Who told you that?" Luis looked down. "I heard it." He clutched the handkerchief tightly. "I don't want to." Claire leaned the mop against the wall and crouched down to his height. "Luis," she said, surprised to hear her own voice. She shouldn't have said his name, but it slipped out like when you try to catch someone who is falling. The boy looked at her, fear in his eyes. "They're going to ask me in front of everyone," he said. "They're going to see me. They're going to tell me to choose." Claire felt something stir in her chest, a mixture of tenderness and anger, but she forced herself to be gentle. "And what do you want to do?" Luis pressed his lips together. "I want to hide forever." Claire exhaled. "I understand." Luis looked at her as if he expected her to say the same thing as everyone else. Be brave, follow through, smile. But Claire didn't say that. "Do you want to make a deal?" she asked. Luis frowned. "What deal?" "When you feel like you can't go on, come here, even if it's just for a minute, even if it's just to breathe." Claire held up one finger. 1, 2, 3, and then you come back. I'm not telling you to face everything, just not to do it alone. Louis breathed shakily, and you'll be there. Claire felt a lump in her throat, because that question wasn't simple, it was dangerous. As long as they let me, she said honestly, as long as you want me to. Louis took another step and without permission, rested his forehead on Claire's shoulder. Claire froze for a second. She knew what it meant to touch the air, but then slowly she raised a hand and placed it on the boy's back, as if holding a hot cup without breaking it. Don't tell anyone, Louis whispered against her shoulder. I won't tell anyone, Claire promised. At that moment, there was a noise and adults' footsteps in the hallway. Claire pulled away suddenly, as if she had been caught with stolen treasure. Louise also straightened up, frightened. A male voice called from afar. Louise, said Prince Etienne's voice. Louis opened his eyes, uncertain. Claire whispered to him, Go to your father. I'll stay here. Louis hesitated, but when he heard the voice again, he quickly left the room. Claire stood motionless, her hands trembling. She had been too close to the air when the prince called her. If anyone had seen her, she forced herself to return to the mop as if nothing had happened, as if her heart weren't pounding against her ribs. A few minutes passed. Claire finished her task and returned to the service area. She tried to ignore the stairs, but the feeling of being watched would not leave her. In a narrow hallway, she found a tray forgotten on a table. It was strange. Everything there was usually picked up immediately. The tray had papers on it, as if someone had been in a hurry. Claire thought about walking past it. Her body was telling her to. Don't touch, don't look, don't exist. But the paper was about to fall. If it fell and got stained, she would be blamed anyway. She just fixed it, she told herself. She picked up the tray and the paper slid off. One remained on top with elegant, firm handwriting. Claire managed to read it without meaning to, the way you read things that jump out at you. Issues to be corrected before the presentation. Claire felt a chill. Her heart told her not to continue, but her eyes were already there. The points were brief and cold. 1. Wardrobe and behavior of the 5 ladies. 2. Order of entry and greeting. 3. Control of the air. Avoid leaks. Avoid influences. 4. Reinforce surveillance in service areas. 5. Identify unauthorized proximity. Claire swallowed hard, lowered the paper a little more, and saw a list of names at the bottom. Names of servants, names of people to watch. Her eyes searched unintentionally as if guided by fate. And there was Claire Dubas. The world seemed to tilt. The tray suddenly felt as heavy as stone. Her breath caught. Her throat went drippy. She felt heat in her face, a mixture of shame and fear, as if she had already been singled out in front of the entire palace. Claire clutched the paper between her fingers, feeling the ink like a judgment, because she understood that at Versailles, you didn't have to commit a fault to be punished. It was enough for someone to decide that she was in the way. Claire folded the paper carefully, as if by doing so she could also fold away the danger. She tucked it into the folds of her apron and left the tray in its place. Clean, as if she had never touched it. But inside, she was no longer clean. Her pulse was racing. Think, she said to herself silently. Don't do anything strange. Don't run. She walked steadily toward the supply room. In the hallway, she passed 2 maids talking in low voices. They say they're arriving early tomorrow, whispered one. 5 o'clock? Asked the other, her eyes wide. 5 o'clock, with their dressmakers and hairdressers, as if they were queens. Claire walked on without looking. If she stayed, if she listened, she would become part of the rumor. When she reached her room, she put down the bucket and leaned against the wall for a second. She closed her eyes and breathed as she had taught the boy. 1, 2, she straightened up, adjusted her apron, and then heard a voice behind the door. There it was. Claire opened her eyes wide. The door flew open and the head butler and an elderly woman from the staff, stiff as a board, entered. Claire Dubois, said the butler, without greeting her. Are you carrying any papers that do not belong to you? Claire felt the floor move beneath her, but she forced her face to remain still. No, Claire. The butler looked at her slowly. I saw you near a tray that was not in your area. I was passing by with the soap tray, sir. The woman in service spoke in a warning tone. In this palace, what is dropped is left dropped, and what is heard is forgotten. Claire bowed her head. Yes, ma'am. The butler took a step toward her. Tomorrow you will be in the main halls as ordered. You will clean, you will move without getting in the way, and you will keep your eyes down. Understood? Yes, sir. And one more thing, he said, lowering his voice. Do not go near the heir, even if he asks you to, even if he cries, even if he seeks you out. Claire felt a twinge in her chest, but she did not move. Yes, sir. The butler looked at her as if he wanted to see inside her. Very well, he said, and they left without further ado. Claire was left alone, her hands frozen. She took out the hidden paper and looked at it again, just for a second. Then she put it away again. She couldn't burn it or throw it away. If they found it, it would be even worse. If she lost it, it would be like signing her own death warrant without knowing why. Calm down tomorrow, just tomorrow, she told herself. But at Versailles, tomorrow could ruin a life. At dawn, the palace awoke differently. There were no shouts or disorderly rushes, but an elegant, coordinated, and dangerous rush. Claire entered through the service door and noticed that the air smelled of expensive perfume, even though she was far from the dressing rooms. You're late, a supervisor snapped at her. I arrived on time, Claire replied without raising her voice. Time changes when the court changes, said the supervisor, placing a bucket in her hands. Central corridor floor, and don't make me look bad. Claire didn't answer. She walked toward the central hallway with the bucket and rag, and there they were. Huge flower arrangements, tables with perfect tablecloths, freshly polished candlesticks. Everything sparkled. Everything was ready to make morning seem less like morning. As if grief also had to look pretty, Claire thought, and bit her tongue. As she scrubbed, she heard a woman's laughter, then another. Soft heels, measured steps. A maid rushed by, almost bumping into Claire. Move, move, she said without apologizing. They're coming through. Claire pressed herself against the wall with her bucket. The 5 noble ladies appeared one after another, accompanied by mothers, aunts, and assistants. Some wore an air of triumph, others of nervousness. All had smiles at the ready. Claire lowered her gaze, as she had been instructed. Even so, she saw enough. The first, Elise Blair, walked as if she owned the floor. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. Everything was arranged so that she wouldn't look. The second, Countess Margot de Lanois, did look. She looked at every corner as if counting doors. Her eyes passed over Claire as if she were evaluating a piece of furniture. The third, Elodie de Remusat, wore the sweetest smile, but her hands, clutching her fan, gave her away. The fourth, Sabine de Rochefort, did not lower her chin for a moment. Her gaze was sharp, without the need for words. The fifth, Camille de Brissac, walked less confidently. She wasn't clumsy, she just seemed more human. She noticed a vase that was wobbling and quickly signaled to a maid to straighten it before anyone noticed. Claire felt something strange, a small relief, as if at least one of them was truly breathing, but she didn't have time to think. The supervisor silenced her. Claire, make the floor shine. Claire continued scrubbing, and then she felt it before she saw it. A small presence, a light step. She turned slightly and saw him at the end of the hallway. Luis was coming with 2 tutors and a guard. His clothes were impeccable and his hair perfect, but his face looked like a mask and seemed to be in pain. One of the tutors murmured, Smile, Your Highness, just a little. The other said, Wave, a gesture, that's it. Luis didn't respond. He walked along, staring at a fixed point, until suddenly he turned his head and saw her. The boy's eyes widened slightly, not out of surprise, but out of relief. Claire felt her heart skip a beat. She remembered the butler's order. Don't get too close. So she didn't get too close. She just lowered her head and continued scrubbing the floor, pretending she hadn't seen him, even though her hands were shaking. Luis paused for a moment, and so did the tutors. They were confused. What's wrong, Your Highness? One asked. Luis didn't speak. He just looked. The guard cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Let's continue, he said. They made him walk again. Luis moved forward, but as he passed Claire, he clenched the handkerchief in his fist, the same one from before. Claire recognized it. She had given it to him, made of cotton. Now it was folded as if it were a treasure. Claire swallowed. She did nothing. Not a gesture, not a word. Luis passed by, but just before he walked away, his lips moved in a barely audible whisper. Claire froze, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't. The boy continued on, and when he turned the corner, Claire exhaled the breath she didn't know she was holding. The presentation ceremony was not held in a single moment, but was more like an unspoken parade. The nobles gathered in groups, feigning interest in charity, family values, and the future of the kingdom. Claire cleaned as the Duchess wanted, and the Duchess, from one end of the hall, saw her. Claire noticed. It was like when someone stares at you. The Duchess of Blair approached slowly, surrounded by two ladies. Her black mourning dress was impeccable, but the sparkle in her eyes was not that of someone in mourning. She stopped in front of Claire. Claire lowered her gaze further and curtsied quickly without letting go of the rag. "Your Excellency," she murmured. "So you are Claire," said the Duchess, as if pronouncing a name she had read many times before. "Yes, Your Excellency." "How curious," said the Duchess, turning slightly so that the others could hear her. "The walls talk, and so do the corridors. They say certain corridors offer solace." Claire did not respond. She couldn't. Any word was fuel. One of the ladies in waiting let out a short giggle. "Your Excellency, don't worry," said one of the ladies. "Influences wash away." Claire clutched the rag, but kept her head down. The Duchess continued in a kind voice. "Just remember your place, child. Compassion can be mistaken for ambition." "Yes, Your Excellency," Claire managed to say, almost without a voice. "Good," replied the Duchess, satisfied. "I like obedience. It makes life easier." The Duchess walked away. Claire felt the air returning, but it was wan, as if she were breathing glass. Later, while cleaning near a table, she overheard two nobles commenting, "They say the prince is desperate." "No, he's not desperate. He's under pressure. And the boy doesn't decide anything. He's just a child. He's being guided." Claire closed her eyes for a moment. She forced herself to continue carving the wood of a chair, as if it were to blame for everything. At that moment, Baroness Camille passed by her, accompanied by an elderly woman. Seeing Claire so tense, Camille lowered her fan slightly and said in a low voice, almost without moving her lips, "Be careful in the corridors today." Claire looked up in surprise. Camille looked at her sideways, as if not to compromise herself, but the warning was real. "Thank you, madam," Claire murmured. Camille made a slight gesture and left. Claire did not know if it was kindness or simple prudence, but she kept it as a small breath of air. Afternoon turned to evening, and before Claire knew it, the appointed day had arrived. It wasn't announced with trumpets, but with the nervousness of the staff, the excessive shine of the floor, and the smell of fresh wax. "Hey," said a pale maid. "Today the boy chooses," replied another excitedly, as if it were a game. Claire felt nauseous. The supervisor gave her stricter orders. "I want you in the side room. You're going to keep that edge clean. No one wants to see a stain when the heir decides." Claire took her rag, nodded, and walked to the side room, which had a partial view of the great hall where the court would gather. It wasn't in the center, but it was close enough for everyone to see her if they wanted to. And Claire knew they wanted to see her. Nobles entered, ladies entered, men with ribbons and medals entered, all in silence, as if preparing to hear a verdict. Claire stood in her corner, near a column. She cleaned a ledge that was already clean, just to appear useful. Then the 5 ladies arrived, lined up, each with her own style. Dell smiled as if she had already won. Margot looked at the audience, gauging their reactions. Elodie blinked rapidly, nervously. Sabin held her chin high, almost defiantly. Camille took deep breaths as if trying not to faint. The Duchess of Beclair took her place with the calmness of a queen. The Chancellor stood near the prince, and then he appeared. Claire saw him up close for the first time, not as a rumor, not as a figure, but as a man. His face was tense, his shoulders straight, and his eyes tired. He looked like someone who had slept little and forced himself to get up out of duty. He walked to his place without looking at anyone more than necessary. Louis entered, led by a tutor. The room grew even quieter, as if the air had stopped to watch him. "Your Highness," whispered the tutor, "remember what we practiced." Louis did not respond. His eyes scanned the room. Claire lowered her gaze. Her hands burned from clenching the rags so tightly. "Don't look at me," she wanted to say without saying it. "Don't look for me, please." But the boy was already looking for her. The chancellor stepped forward with a formal voice. "In these times of mourning and hope, the court appreciates His Royal Highness's willingness to secure the future of the heir." Claire listened and did not listen. The words were smoke. She only looked at the boy's feet, how they moved, as if each step weighed heavily on him. The chancellor continued, in front of everyone, "And by the will of His Royal Highness, the young prince will have the honor of choosing the lady he desires as a mother figure in the palace." A murmur ran through the room. The Duchess smiled. The tutor leaned toward Louis. "Now, Your Highness." Louis stood still. He looked at the ladies lined up. They all smiled, as if smiling were enough to be a mother. Adele took a delicate step forward. "My prince," she said in a sweet voice, "I will take care of you, I promise." Louis did not move. Margot bowed her head slightly. "Your Highness, the House of Lenoir has served the crown loyally. Your well-being would be my priority." Louis clenched the handkerchief in his fist. His gaze fell to the floor, as if he wanted to disappear. Elodia spoke quickly, nervously. "I will do whatever you need. I will sing to him if he cannot sleep. I will read to him." Sabine smiled slightly. "An heir needs discipline and presence. He would not allow weakness in his environment." At first, Camille said nothing, just looked at the child, and his expression changed slightly, softening. "Your Highness," he finally said in a simple voice, "I'm not here to scare you, just to introduce myself." Louis looked up, looked at them all, and then looked at Prince Etienne. The prince watched him with his heart in his hand, though he tried to hide it. His lips were tight, but his eyes asked for something he didn't dare say. "Louis," Etienne whispered, barely audibly. "Son," Louis said, swallowing hard. His eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. He just took a breath, as if remembering something. 1, 2. And then, without looking at the nobles anymore, he turned his body. Claire felt the world go dark. The boy walked. At first, some thought he was going toward Adele, and then toward Margot, as the ladies were lined up in that direction. But he didn't stop in front of either of them. The murmurs grew restless. "Where is he going? What is His Highness doing?" Louise continued straight ahead with short but firm steps, like someone who has already made a decision and does not want anyone to change his mind. Claire stood still. She wanted to move. She wanted to hide behind the column. She wanted to disappear, but her feet would not respond. Louis reached her, raised his hand, and took hers. Not as if asking permission, but as if holding on so as not to fall. Claire felt the warmth of that small hand in hers. She felt the trembling. She felt the weight of all eyes on her. "Her," Louise said in a clear voice without shouting. "Just her." And it was as if the whole palace had said it. A monstrous silence fell suddenly. Then the room erupted in murmurs. "What? Who is she?" "She's a servant." "It can't be." Adele's smile froze. Margot raised her eyebrows. Elodie put a hand to her chest, pale. Sabine let out a short, cruel laugh of pure contempt. Camille stood still, not knowing whether to look at the boy or the floor. Claire tried to let go of Louise's hand. Her instincts screamed at her not to involve him any further, not to make him suffer. "My prince," she whispered desperately, unsure if it was the right thing to do. "No," said Louise, squeezing her hand tighter. "No," he said, not as a rejection of her, but as a decision. "You." The Duchess of Buckler stepped forward with a calmness that cut through the air. "This is unacceptable," she said, and her voice filled the room as if it were an order. "Your Highness is confused." The Chancellor blinked, showing no immediate reaction, as if his mind couldn't comprehend the disaster. Etienne stood rigid. For a moment, he seemed not to be breathing. The Duchess looked directly at Claire for the first time, as if she wanted to see right through her. "What did you say to the heir, girl?" Claire felt her face burning. She wanted to answer truthfully. She wanted to say nothing. She wanted to say she had only heard it. She wanted to say she hadn't used it. But her throat closed up because anything she said could sound like an excuse. Louis lifted his chin. "She's leaving me," said the boy. And that simple sentence made Claire's eyes water. Sabine blurted out without caring about the volume. What a shameful spectacle. Elodie murmured, "Sheesh, poor child." Margot said something to her companion in a low voice. This changes everything. Adele looked to the Duchess for instructions as if she were a puppet waiting for the string. The Duchess raised her hand, asking for silence, and got it. Your Highness, she said, addressing Prince Etienne, this cannot be allowed to stand. The court cannot permit undue influence. Claire felt the word influence like an invisible whip. Your Excellency, Claire finally managed to say in a trembling voice, I haven't done anything. The Duchess smiled faintly. Of course, the hands that clean the floor never do anything. They just pick up what falls, right? Some discreet laughter was stifled. Claire clenched her teeth. She wanted to lower her head, but Louis held it up. Etienne took a step as if to speak. The Chancellor touched his arm nervously. His Highness Etienne opened his mouth, but the Duchess was quicker. The heir must be separated from that woman, she said without raising her voice, as if giving a domestic order. For his own good, he's upset. Louis clung to Claire. No, he said, and his voice trembled for the first time. No. Claire felt her heart break because she knew what was going to happen. She knew how things were arranged in the palace, by removing what was inconvenient. Louise, she whispered, trying to remain calm. Breathe. But the boy wouldn't let go of her. Two servants, summoned by a gesture from the Duchess, began to approach Claire with careful steps and outstretched hands, ready to pull her away. And Louise, his hand clinging to hers, did not let go. The servant stopped halfway, hesitating. It was not every day that a child heir clung to a cleaning lady in front of half the court. Your Highness, one of them murmured, his eyes fixed on the floor. I must... Louis squeezed Claire's hand tighter. His fingers trembled, but his grip was firm. No, he repeated, and this time he said it looking at the Duchess, as if he finally dared to face the monster. The Duchess of Blair smiled softly. How brave, she said, and how sad that someone has mistaken that bravery for disobedience. Claire felt the air leave her. She wanted to bow, to beg, to explain, but she had no permission to speak in that room. She knew it from the way everyone looked at her as if she were not her own mistress. Then Etienne stepped forward. Enough, said the prince, his voice cutting through the murmur. The Duchess raised her eyebrows, feigning surprise. Your Highness, I am only protecting the heir. Look how he trembles. He is in no condition to decide. He is. He let go of Etienne and then paused, as if biting his tongue, as if remembering that every sentence was a political thread that could be broken. The Chancellor approached with restrained urgency. Your Highness, this is a public disaster. My son is here, Etienne replied, without looking at him. Louis turned his eyes to his father. For the first time, he didn't look like a frightened child, but a tired one. Dad, he said in a voice so weak it hurt, don't take it off. Claire felt tears burning in her eyes, but she swallowed them back. She mustn't cry. If she cried, she would look guilty. If she trembled, she looked suspicious. If she breathed heavily, she looked defiant. The Duchess took a step forward. Your Highness, she said in a tone of advice, separate them now before this becomes an uncontrollable scandal. Sabina de Rochefort covered her mouth with her fan and whispered loud enough for several people to hear. It already is. Adele clutched her fan with both hands, as if she wanted to break it. Margot watched the prince, not Claire, calculating which side would win. Elodie looked as if she were about to cry with embarrassment. Kamal, on the other hand, did not take his eyes off Louis, as if he understood that this was not a game. Etienne looked at Louis, then at Claire, and something flashed across his face, a tough battle on the outside, human on the inside. Come, Louis said in a softer voice. Louis did not move. His hand remained glued to Claire's as if it were an anchor. He said nothing. The room filled with a more tense murmur. The word no from the mouth of an heir was gunpowder. The Chancellor whispered quickly in Etienne's ear, almost pleading, if you don't separate them, the Duchess will make this bigger. They're going to eat you alive, Your Highness. Etienne closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, his gaze was hard. Gentlemen, he said, his voice no longer that of a father, but of a prince. Everyone, withdraw. The Duchess smiled as if she had just won a small battle, a sensible decision. Etienne raised a hand without looking at her. Everyone, he repeated, and then he looked at her. Including your excellency, he repeated, and then he looked at her. Silence fell again. The Duchess blinked, and her smile tightened slightly. Your Highness, you must obey in my house, Etienne interrupted without raising his voice. For a moment it seemed as if the Duchess was going to argue. However, she turned elegantly, as if retiring of her own accord. Well, Shendon, as you wish, she said, her tone promising unspoken revenge. The court began to move slowly and confusedly. They did not retreat very far, of course, but merely dispersed to turn everything into immediate gossip. Claire remained there, caught in the middle, the child's hand clinging to hers. Etienne approached. Claire, he said. Hearing her name spoken by the prince, Claire felt as if the world were collapsing around her. Your Highness, she managed to reply, lowering her head. Etienne looked at his son's hand on Claire's. Louise, he said, let go. Louis shook his head vigorously and his eyes filled with tears. If I let go, they'll take her away, said the boy, as if he already knew how the palace worked. Etienne clenched his jaw and then crouched down to his son's height. It was the most human gesture Claire had seen from a noble in a long time. Son, Etienne said slowly, no one is going to take her away without me knowing. Louis swallowed. I promise, Etienne said, holding the boy's gaze. I promise, he said. Louis hesitated, his hand loosening slightly, but he didn't let go completely. Claire felt the need to help, not with speeches or heroics, but with the only thing she knew. My prince, she said very softly, as if speaking to a wounded child rather than an heir. Breathe with me. 1, 2, Louis breathed. His shoulders dropped a little. It's okay, whispered Claire. I'm fine. Louis looked at her. Aren't they going to scold you? Claire wanted to lie to him. She wanted to say no, but she couldn't. They might ask me questions, but I haven't done anything wrong. Louise frowned as if the world made no sense. So why didn't Claire have an answer that a child deserved? She just squeezed his hand tenderly once and then slowly loosened her grip so that the boy would realize she wasn't pulling him away. Louise let go of her, his lip trembling. Etienne straightened up and his voice became authoritative again. Take the heir to his chambers. No more visitors, no more introductions. No one will pressure him today. The tutors looked at each other nervously. Your Highness, the protocol. Not today, said Etienne. Louis turned to Claire one last time, desperate. Will you be there? He asked, his voice breaking. Claire forced herself to smile. As long as they let me, she whispered. Louis nodded as if that phrase were an oath. The tutors led him away. Louis allowed himself to be led away, but he turned back several times as if afraid the ground would swallow him up. When he was finally taken away, the room was almost empty. Only Etienne, the chancellor, 2 guards, and Claire remained, who felt like a stain on an expensive tablecloth. The chancellor approached Etienne urgently. Your Highness, we must control this. We must send a message. The Duchess raised a hand. Later, she said, but the chancellor insisted, his tone brooking no argument. The chancellor swallowed and took a step back. The guard's mere presence made Claire feel accused, even though no one said guilty. Etienne looked at her for the first time as if he really saw her, and not as a figure in the background. What did you do? He asked. Claire looked up, surprised by the direct question. Then she looked down again out of habit. Nothing, Your Highness. That's not an answer. Claire clenched her fingers and handed His Highness a handkerchief. I saw him crying in a hallway and stayed close so he wouldn't be alone. The chancellor laughed incredulously. A handkerchief. That's all. Yes, sir, Claire said carefully. That's all. Etienne watched her. There was no mockery on his face. There was tension. Why are you looking for me? He insisted. Etienne, she swallowed. Because I'm not asking you for anything. She blurted out, then panicked at having said too much. The chancellor frowned, offended. Are you implying that we asked too much of her? Claire lowered her head even further. No, sir, I'm not implying anything. Etienne interrupted him with a glance. Let her speak. The chancellor pressed his lips together. Claire took a deep breath, and her voice came out small but firm. Your Highness, I just listened to him. Sometimes when you're sad, that's all you need. Etienne didn't respond immediately. He looked toward the door where his son had left. They're going to accuse you, he said finally, bluntly. Claire knew that, even so, hearing it left her frozen. I know, Your Highness, and if you are accused, I must act, Etienne added, as if the words hurt him. Claire felt a sharp pain, like a blow inside her. I understand, said the Chancellor. He stepped forward, regaining his composure. For the good of the palace, this woman must be formally questioned. Whether there is undue influence, emotional manipulation, or attempted grooming. Claire looked up, and for the first time, her voice trembled with indignation. I did nothing wrong. The Chancellor clicked his tongue. Your words, girl. Etienne raised his hand. An investigation will be conducted, he said, but I will not tolerate public humiliation. Take her to the service quarters. Have the Chief of Staff supervise her. No one will mistreat her or parade her around, understood? The guards nodded. Claire felt something strange. She felt fear, yes, but also a little relief. No one mistreats her. At Versailles, that was already a lot. Even so, as she was escorted through the narrow corridors, Claire felt every stare as if it were a stone. The servants peered out and whispered. The nobles pretended not to see her, which was worse, and the rumor spread faster than any footsteps. The Chief of Staff, a woman with her hair pulled back and a stern expression, greeted her with a grimace. What have you done, Claire? She asked without saying hello. Nothing, Claire replied wearily. The chief crossed her arms. Nothing is nothing here. Here, everything becomes something. They put her in a small room with a pen, a chair, and a candle. It wasn't a prison, but it was close. The chief sat down across from her. Let's talk, she said, and you're going to answer without crying or making a scene because that will ruin you. Claire swallowed. Yes, ma'am. How long has the air been locked up for you? Claire thought of the hallway, of the hidden tears. A few days? What do you tell him? Nothing about politics. Nothing at all. I just listened to him. The boss raised her eyebrows. And why do you think he's looking for you? What do you have that the others don't? Claire pressed her lips together. That question was a trap. I don't know, she said finally. Maybe because I'm not a lady. The boss sighed. That's exactly what's going to do you in. The door opened and a clerk from the Chancellor's office entered with a folder. He didn't even look at Claire as a person, only as another case. By order of the Chancellor, we will record your statement, he said curtly. The boss clicked her tongue. Here comes the show. The clerk sat down. He took out a pen. Name. Claire Dubois, she replied. Services offered. Cleaning. Relationship to the royal family? She asked incredulously. Claire looked at her incredulously. None. Direct contact with the heir. Claire took a deep breath. I've seen him. I've heard him. He once sought me out in a hallway. The clerk looked up. I touched him. Claire felt her face burning. She gave him a handkerchief. Nothing else. I held him by the shoulder when he was crying, she admitted shamefully. The clerk took note, and his pen sounded like a sentence. He spoke ill of the noble ladies. No, he spoke of his deceased mother. Claire hesitated. The truth was delicate. He mentioned her. He said, I just nodded. The clerk narrowed his eyes. He promised that you would be his mother. Claire opened her mouth in horror. No, never. The boss tapped her fingers impatiently on the table. This is absurd. The child is in mourning. He sought comfort where he found it. Are you really going to treat this as a crime? The clerk did not respond, only continued. There is suspicion of influence, of manipulation through proximity, of taking advantage of one's position. Claire felt her throat burning. I didn't take advantage of anything, she said, and her voice broke slightly. The chief gave her a quick glance. Don't cry as a warning. Claire swallowed and forced herself to breathe. The clerk closed the folder. For now, she remains under supervision. She will not be allowed to approach the heir, and if it is determined that there has been any wrongdoing, she will be removed from the palace. Claire felt an emptiness in her stomach. Removed, she repeated as if she didn't understand the word. Expelled, said the clerk indifferently. And if your conduct is deemed malicious, the chancellor will decide on additional measures. The boss stood up furiously but restrained herself. Go now, she said to the clerk. We are not a court here. The clerk left without looking back. The boss closed the door with restrained force. Then she turned to Claire. Listen to me carefully, she said, lowering her voice. They're going to want to use your case as an example, because it's easier to blame a maid than to admit that the ceremony was cruel. Claire clasped her hands in her lap. I just, she began. I know, the boss interrupted her, but knowing doesn't protect you. Neither does etiquette. Claire felt the world closing in on her. What do I do? She asked. There was a childish tone in her voice, even though Claire hadn't felt like a child in years. The boss looked at her for a second longer, and her harshness softened a little. All you can do is not contradict, not provoke, not defend yourself with pride. Give them little ammunition, and pray that the prince has backbone. Claire froze. And if he doesn't? The boss didn't answer. That was answer enough. Hours later, Claire was returned to a work area under surveillance. They didn't lock her up, but they assigned her to tasks far from the halls. Still, every time someone passed by, Claire noticed them looking at her. In a hallway, a young maid whispered to her as she walked by, They say you bewitched him. Claire stopped, horrified. What did you say? The maid shrank back in fear. That's what they say, Claire. I don't believe it, but that's what they say. Claire felt a chill. Don't say that, she whispered. That's crazy. The maid lowered her voice even more. It's the word they use when they don't understand. Be careful. Claire continued walking with a lump in her throat. Spell, influence, words to justify contempt. That night, when the palace had calmed down a bit, the chief of staff assigned her to clean an old section of the archive wing, which was almost abandoned. No one can see you there, she said emotionlessly. All the better, Claire. She nodded. Being far away was better, yes, but it was also sad, as if she were being slowly erased. In that wing, the air smelled of stored paper. There were wooden cabinets, some with old locks. Claire worked quietly, dusting and tidying things up. As she moved a basket, something metallic fell to the floor with a clink. She bent down. It was a small, dark, old key. She picked it up and looked at it, confused. Where did you come from? She whispered. I shouldn't keep it. But if she left it there, someone else would find it and think she had hidden it. So she put it in her apron pocket, determined to give it to her boss the next day. She continued cleaning. As she passed a cupboard with a worn lock, she noticed that the key in her hand felt heavy, as if it were calling to her. It wasn't curiosity about gossip, it was survival instinct. Since the scandal that morning, Claire already knew one thing. They were pushing her toward a fall she hadn't caused. And if the palace was going to crush her, she needed to know who was stepping on her. I just want to know what key it is, she told herself by way of excuse. She looked around. Silence. No one. She put the key in the lock. It fit. She turned it carefully. The click sounded small, but to Claire it was like thunder. She opened the door slightly. Inside was a bundle of papers tied with tape. They were not worthless documents, but letters, some stamped and others with notes in the margins. Claire felt her mouth go dry. No, don't get involved, she told herself. But one letter was loose and the stamp was visible. Claire recognized the emblem of Blair, the Duchess. Claire didn't open the letter. She just read the visible heading and 2 lines peeking out from the fold, enough to understand the tone. Instructions, meetings, promises of favors, and a repeated name, Adele. Claire swallowed hard. She slammed the closet door shut, not with force, but with fear. She stood still for a second, listening to her own breathing. This isn't mine, she repeated to herself. This isn't mine. But she had already seen it, and that was dangerous enough. She forced herself to think calmly. If someone found her there with that key and the closet open, she would be finished. With trembling hands, she opened the closet just enough to take out only the loose letter, not the entire package. She kept a single letter in case she had to defend herself, in case the prince asked questions and she needed something more than her word. She quickly folded it and hid it in her apron, close to her body as if it were a thorn. She closed the cupboard and turned the key to leave it as it was. Then she put the key in another pocket, separate so as not to make any noise. She finished cleaning as if nothing had happened. She forced herself to breathe slowly. 1, 2. When she returned to the service area, she noticed that the palace was strange. Not because of the nobles, but because of the servants. Everyone was moving quickly, but it wasn't the usual rush. It was the rush you get when you're worried. A cook grabbed her arm. "Claire, where were you? They're looking for you." Claire felt a blow to her chest. "Who?" "They say the boy won't eat or talk and has locked himself in his room." Another maid joined the conversation, almost crying. She burst into tears, but the kind of ugly crying where you can't breathe. And she screamed your name. Claire froze. "My name?" "Yes," said the Duchess. "It's proof that you messed with him." Claire clutched the apron where she had hidden the letter. She felt the paper against her skin like a burning secret. The head of staff appeared at the end of the hallway, walking quickly. When she saw Claire, she stopped in front of her. "Come," she said bluntly. Claire tried to speak, but no sound came out. The headmistress took her by the arm and dragged her to a corner, away from prying ears. "What you did today, in the closet," she murmured, as if she knew everything, and Claire turned pale. "Not me," she said quickly, terrified. "Not me." But the boss interrupted her. "Don't explain now, just listen. The heir is in trouble and the prince is about to break." Claire swallowed hard. "What's going to happen?" The boss looked at her with a strange mixture of harshness and urgency. "They're going to use you as an excuse, or they're going to really need you. And I don't know which is worse." Before Claire could answer, a guard appeared in the hallway and approached with a firm step. He brought no anger, only urgency. Claire Dubois said, "Of course." Claire felt her legs trembling. "Prince Etienne orders you to be taken to his chambers immediately," he managed to say. Claire walked behind the guard with her body stiff and her head down, as she had been taught from day one, but inside nothing was in order. She could feel the key in her pocket, the folded letter pressed against her chest, and the weight of an entire palace on her back. "To His Highness's chambers," she whispered, unable to help herself. "Yes," replied the guard without turning to look at her, "and walk without stopping." Claire swallowed hard. "Not me. I shouldn't be there today." "Yes," he said curtly, as if he didn't want to discuss the obvious. They walked through corridors that Claire had only seen from a distance. The floors were too shiny, as if the wax wanted to cover up the scandal. The servants moved aside with wide eyes. No one spoke aloud, but the rumor followed them. When they reached an antechamber, a valet raised a hand to stop them. "Who brought her?" "The prince's orders," said the guard. The valet looked her up and down as if he didn't believe it. Then he clicked his tongue. "Wait here." Claire stood motionless with her hands clasped in front of her apron. The guard turned his back to her. From inside came a child's voice, muffled and desperate. "No, no, I don't want to." Then another male voice was heard, tense but careful. "Luis, breathe, son, look at me." A silence, it cut through the air. Claire felt her chest tighten. She closed her eyes for a second. 1, 2, she told herself, so as not to break down. The valet opened the door slightly and poked his head out. "Your Highness, the girl is here." "Let her in," said the prince without hesitation. Claire entered slowly. She didn't look up right away, she just listened. Luis was in a large armchair, huddled as best he could, his face red and sweaty. He had a handkerchief in his hand, crumpled into a ball. A tutor stood uselessly beside him, repeating empty words. Etienne stood in front of the boy, leaning over him, his shirt immaculate, but his face distraught. "They're going to take me away," Luis stammered between gasps. "No, they're not going to take you away, Luis," Etienne said, clenching his teeth. "No one is going to hurt you, Luis." He looked up, saw Claire, and the world changed in his face. He didn't calm down completely, but he stopped feeling alone. Claire said it as if that word were a lifeline. Claire took a step forward and stopped. She looked at the prince, asking for permission with her eyes, even though she shouldn't have looked at him like that. Etienne made a quick gesture. "Come closer." Claire knelt down to the child's level without touching him yet. "My prince," she said softly. "I'm here. Look at me." Louis tried to speak, but his crying prevented him. Claire raised her open hand without invading his space. "May I?" she asked. Louis nodded desperately and approached her. Claire held him carefully, just enough, like when you hold a heart that beats too fast. "Breathe with me," she whispered in his ear. "1, 2, 3." Louis inhaled shakily. Claire repeated it. 1, 2. Etienne watched them without moving, as if he didn't know where to put his hands, as if he had forgotten how to help a child without the world judging him. Louis breathed again. His chest stopped heaving so violently. "They told me they were going to kick you out, that you weren't going to be here anymore," he blurted out, his voice breaking. Claire felt a lump in her throat, but she kept her voice soft. "I'm here," she repeated. "I'm here now, but what about tomorrow?" asked the boy, and that word was like a stab without a knife. Claire swallowed hard. "We'll see," she said honestly, so as not to scare him. "But what I can promise you is that it wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." Louise clung to her tighter. "Yes, it was," he said, crying softly. "Because I said, and they got angry." Claire adjusted the handkerchief in his hand. "Listen to me," she said firmly, but without being harsh. "Grown-ups get angry when they can't control something, but that doesn't mean you did anything wrong." Louise took a breath, and finally the crying subsided a little. Etienne cleared his throat. His voice sounded lower. "Thank you," he said, and he wasn't saying it to the boy, he was saying it to Claire. Claire looked up quickly, surprised. She saw the prince with tired eyes as if he were holding up the palace with his back. "Your Highness," she replied and looked down again. "Leave us," Etienne ordered, looking at the tutor and the valet. "But Your Highness," the tutor began. "Leave us," Etienne repeated without raising his voice, and that was worse than a shout. The men left, the door closed, and the three of them were left alone. The silence was different because, at last, Louis was breathing. Etienne took a step toward him. "Louis," he said more softly, "are you in pain?" Louis shook his head, still clinging to Claire. "It hurts here," he said, pointing to his chest. Etienne closed his eyes for a second. "I know," he murmured. Claire noticed how the boy gradually relaxed. When his breathing became more regular, she whispered, "Would you like some water?" Louis nodded, his face pressed against her shoulder. Claire looked at the prince. "Can I get it for him?" Etienne gestured toward a small table. "There." Claire took the glass and brought it to him. Louis drank slowly, as if the water also calmed him. When he finished, Louis wiped his mouth with his handkerchief. "They're not going to make me choose anymore?" he asked fearfully. Etienne stood still, looked at his son and then at Claire, as if he needed borrowed strength to tell the truth. "Not today," he finally replied, "and they won't put you in a corner again, to be looked at as if you were an object." Louis looked at him doubtfully. "Really, really," said Etienne. Louis took a deep breath, rested his head on Claire, and calmed down. Etienne watched them for a moment, then spoke carefully, measuring each word. "Claire Douisa," he said. Claire tensed. "Yes, Your Highness, I need to understand," said Etienne. "I need you to tell me the whole truth, without fear." Claire clenched her fingers. "The truth is, I didn't seek him out," she said. "He found me crying. Well, I found him and stayed close, that's all." "Did you speak ill of the ladies?" Etienne asked. "No," Claire replied immediately. "I wouldn't dare. And even if I did, I don't think that way. It's not a matter of speaking ill of anyone." Etienne stared at her. "What did you give him?" Claire hesitated for a second. "A handkerchief," she said, in silence. Louis murmured, half asleep, "He left me." Etienne swallowed. "That's what he said in the hall," Etienne commented, and his voice became a little harder. "And that's why the court wants to crush you." Claire lowered her gaze. "I know. It's His Highness. Did they threaten you?" and he asked. Claire hesitated. She didn't want to start a war that would crush her. "They asked me questions and told me they were going to remove me from the palace." Etienne clenched his jaw. "Who?" Claire remained silent. Etienne noticed. "Claire," he said more firmly, "if you don't tell me, they win." Claire took a deep breath. "The Chancellor's clerk told me that the Duchess had spoken to me in the hallway. He told me that compassion can be mistaken for ambition. Louis shifted as if he were afraid to even remember that voice. Etienne lowered his voice. All right, he said. I understand the game. Claire noticed that the child was falling asleep. She carefully adjusted him so he wouldn't fall off the couch. Etienne moved closer, but without invading her space. He spoke almost in a whisper so as not to wake the child. What else is there? He asked. Don't lie to me, I beg you. Claire froze. The letter she carried in her apron seemed to throb. She began to speak and her voice broke. Etienne leaned in slightly. I swear no one will touch you, he said softly. Not while I'm here. Claire swallowed. It wasn't just any promise. It was the prince. Even so, her fear didn't go away with words. I found something, she finally confessed. Ethan's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. What did you find? Claire carefully reached into her apron, pulled out the folded letter, and held it as if it were burning. This is what Etienne said. He took it gently without breaking it and looked at the seal. Wow, Claire, he murmured. Claire took out the small key and placed it in her other palm. And this, she added. Etienne raised his eyebrows. Where did you get it? Claire spoke quickly and quietly, as if confessing a sin. They sent me to clean the old archives wing, and it fell out of the floor. I thought about handing it in, but it fit in a closet. I saw the seal and I was afraid. I only took this letter to prove I'm not making anything up. Ethel stared at her intently. You opened the cabinet. Just a little, Claire said, almost breathlessly. There were more papers. I didn't take any, just this one. And I closed it. Etienne was silent for a moment, then said quietly, You've done something dangerous. Claire nodded, trembling. Yes, Your Highness, but you also did something brave, he added. That surprised Claire so much that she almost jerked her head up. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to get involved. I know, said Etienne, and that's precisely why I believe you. Claire felt her body relax a little, as if someone had finally removed a weight from her shoulders. Etienne looked at his son, who was sleeping, leaning against Claire. His eyes softened. My son trusts you, he said, almost to himself, and I need to learn why. Claire lowered her gaze, careful not to move the child. I'm no one special, Your Highness. Etienne let out a short exhale. They've told you that a lot, too. Really? Claire didn't answer. Etienne opened the letter silently and read it quickly. His face showed no anger, but cold determination. This isn't just about a mother, he said. It's about control, about turning Louise into a trophy. Claire swallowed. I don't understand politics. I understand people, Etienne replied, and today that's worth more. Claire dared to look up for a second. Their eyes met, and Claire felt something strange. The prince wasn't looking down on her, but as if he were wondering who she really was. Etienne spoke again in a low voice. They'll make up 1,000 stories, he said. They'll say you bewitched him, that you manipulated him, whatever. The court uses words like, wears gloves so as not to get dirty. Claire pressed her lips together. I can't defend myself with pretty words. Then you won't defend yourself, he said, and his tone was clear and firm, without exaggerated promises. Only truth. Claire felt her eyes moisten, but she held back. Your Highness, I don't want to cause you trouble. Etienne let out a short, tired laugh. The trouble is already here. It was just hidden behind the fans. He walked to the door and rang a bell. The valet entered quickly. Your Highness. Find Ahmad, Etienne ordered. My personal secretary, the only one. And tell the Chancellor I will see him privately in an hour. No courtesy, no deference. Yes, Your Highness. The valet left. Claire stood motionless with Louise asleep on her. The child was breathing steadily. At last, his little face looked peaceful. Etienne returned and lowered his voice. Can you stay with him a little longer? He asked. Claire nodded. Yes. Etienne stood there, not knowing what to do with his hands. Then, almost in confession, he said, I tried to calm him down, but I couldn't. Claire looked at him. You're in mourning, she said cautiously, and so is he. Sometimes the pain overwhelms you. He clenched his jaw. I was raised never to falter, he murmured. Claire spoke without thinking, and by the time she realized it, it was too late. But today she had faltered for her son. Not everyone does that. Etienne looked at her in surprise. Then his expression softened just a little. "Who are you, Claire Dubus?" he asked quietly. Claire felt her heart pound. "I'm a working woman," she said, "and I have nowhere to go if I lose this." Etienne nodded as if it hurt him. "You won't lose it. Not this way." An hour later, Luis was still asleep. Claire covered him with a light blanket and settled him carefully into the armchair. She got up slowly without making a sound. Etienne stopped her with a gesture. "Stay," he asked. Claire swallowed hard. "Your Highness, if someone sees me here, if someone sees you here, they will know that I have allowed it," he replied. Claire stayed. Shortly after, the Chancellor entered, his face pale and hurried. Armand, a serious young man with papers and a discreet look, also entered. The Chancellor opened his mouth, ready to speak about the crisis, but His Highness interrupted him. The Count raised a hand before he could speak and said coldly, "I want you to see this." He handed him the letter. The Chancellor took it, read it, and his face changed. "This is what it is," said Etienne. The Chancellor looked at Claire as if he wanted to blame her for having eyes. "She found it. She brought it," corrected Etienne, "and I asked her to." The Chancellor cleared his throat. "Your Highness, with all due respect, this does not prove it." "Armand," Etienne said without looking at him. Armand approached. "Yes, Your Highness. You will go with this key to the archives wing," Etienne ordered it. "You will open the cabinet, take the entire package, make an inventory, and store it under my personal seal." Armand nodded without blinking. "Right away, Your Highness." The Chancellor tensed. "If that comes to light, there will be a scandal." Etienne looked at him with dangerous calm. "Seeing my son as theater was a scandal. He said, 'This is cleaning.'" The Chancellor pressed his lips together. "What will you do with the Duchess?" Etienne took a step closer, something he should have done from the beginning. "Set boundaries." The Chancellor took a deep breath. The 5 ladies and the families waited for an answer. Etienne lowered his voice, as if the child could hear even in his sleep. "The answer is that my son will never again choose anything in front of a crowd," he said. "The presentation is suspended and will be announced today." The Chancellor blinked. "Your Highness, the court. The court will survive a little discomfort." Etienne cut him off. "My son will not survive another humiliation." The Chancellor looked toward the armchair where Louis slept. "I understand," he said at last. Although he clearly didn't like it, Etienne turned to Claire. "You may go and rest," he said, "but I will assign you a room near the heirs' quarters with a salary they cannot touch." Claire opened her eyes wide in disbelief. "Your Highness," said Etienne, "it is protection. It is simple and it is justice." The Chancellor frowned. "A cleaner near the heir?" Etienne looked at him. "Someone who calms him," he replied, "and that is more valuable than 1,000 smiles." Claire felt the ground slip away beneath her feet, but this time it wasn't out of fear, but something more difficult to explain. Feeling seen. "Thank you," she said softly. Etienne held her gaze for a second. "Don't thank me yet," he murmured. "I'm just going to move the palace." That same day in a smaller room, Etienne gathered a small group. The Chancellor, 2 advisors, and the Duchess of Blair, who entered as if nothing had happened. Her smile and her voice were prepared. "Your Highness," she said, bowing her head slightly, "I'm glad to see you're regaining control. Yesterday was unfortunate." Etienne did not return the courtesy. "It was planned," he replied. The Duchess blinked as if that word could not reach her. "Planned." Etienne placed a folder on the table with copies of the letters Armand had already brought, along with an inventory. He did not throw them down. He did not show them off as if they were a spectacle. He simply left them there, as one might drop a truth. The Duchess looked at the folder. Her smile remained, but it was no longer the same. "What is this?" "Your handwriting," said Etienne. "Your instructions, your meetings, your promises." The Chancellor watched silently, his face stern. The Duchess lifted her chin. "Your Highness, this is a malicious interpretation. I was only seeking to protect and control." She cut Etienne off. The Duchess took a deep breath, careful not to lose her composure. "You are going to accuse me before your council." "I am going to ask you for something simpler," said Etienne. "I withdraw from this matter. Stop pressuring the heir. Stop slandering a worker who has done no harm to anyone." The Duchess let out a very brief laugh. A worker refers to the girl named Claire Dubois, Etienne said, with a firmness that silenced even the air. And as long as I am the heir's father, no one here will call her anything else. The Duchess clenched her fan. This will be talked about. Let them talk, said Etienne. And if anyone insists on calling it a scandal, I will remind them that the real scandal is using mourning to negotiate. The council fell silent. No one wanted to take the wrong side. The Duchess bowed slightly, somewhat forced. As you command, Your Highness. Furthermore, Etienne added, his voice lowering but growing colder, the 5 ladies will be treated with respect and sent back with gratitude. The 5 ladies will be treated with respect and sent back with gratitude. They will not be humiliated or used as weapons. This ends today. The Duchess pressed her lips together, and for the first time she had no elegant response. When the meeting ended, Etienne left without looking back. He didn't need to see her fall. He just needed her to stop pushing. That night, Claire was led to a small, clean room near the heir's wing. It wasn't luxurious, but it was dignified. There was a simple bed, a jug of water, and a window. To Claire, that was almost a miracle. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Claire opened it nervously. Camille de Brisa stood there, unaccompanied, her face serious. Claire immediately lowered her head. Lady Camille, she said, raising a hand quickly, I'm not here to make you lower your head, she said softly. I'm here to tell you something that no one else will. Claire looked at her confused. Camille took a deep breath. Today could have destroyed you, she said, and yet you stood your ground. Claire clenched her hands. I was just scared. Yes, said Camille, and yet you didn't use it to hurt anyone, not the ladies, not the child, not the prince. Claire didn't know how to respond. Camille lowered her voice even further. Be careful of the Duchess. Even though she lost a round today, she won't give up so easily. Claire swallowed. I know. Camille hesitated for a second. And take care of the child, he added, not as a symbol, but as a child. Claire nodded. That I know how to do. Camille made a slight gesture like a respectful salute and left. Claire closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, trembling. Shortly after, there was another knock. It was the voice of the maid. Claire, His Highness asked if he may come in for a moment. Claire felt her stomach churn. Yes, she replied, almost without a voice. She was led to a nearby room where Louis was already asleep in his bed. Etienne was calm, standing next to a table without his jacket and with his collar slightly loosened, as if he could finally breathe. When he saw Claire, he didn't put on his mask. He just looked at her. Is he asleep? He said. Claire replied softly. Etienne was silent for a second and then it said something that didn't sound like an order or protocol. You saved him today. Claire looked down. Only me. Don't interrupt me, he said gently. Don't minimize what you do. You do it because you can, and that's not something you learn from etiquette books. Claire swallowed. Your Highness, I don't want you to think that, Etienne said, moving a little closer without invading her space. I think my son chose you because you don't make it a duty. And I think I've been so busy holding the crown that I forgot to hold him. Claire felt her chest tighten, but it wasn't out of fear. You love him, she said simply. Etienne exhaled. With all that I have left, he replied, and then, in a lower voice, but I didn't know how. Claire dared to say it because she couldn't keep it to herself anymore. They demanded too much of him, she said, and you demanded too much of yourself. Etienne looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something new and dangerous because it was true. Claire spoke slowly. I want you to stay close to Louis officially, with a name that no one can trample on. Not as a whim of the child, but as my decision. Claire opened her trembling mouth. And what will they say? Etienne lifted his chin, but his voice sounded calm. They'll say whatever they want. They already do. I just need you to tell me if you accept. Claire felt the weight of that question. It wasn't an I order you. It was a I ask you. And that disarmed her. I accept, she said cautiously at last, but with one condition. Etienne wasn't offended, he just waited. Don't hide me, Claire said firmly. Don't use me as a secret. If I'm going to take care of Louis, it will be with respect, you scoundrel. Etienne held her gaze for a long time. It's a deal, he replied. Claire felt she could finally breathe easy. Etienne walked to the door of the boy's room, looked at Louise sleeping, and spoke as if he didn't want anyone to hear him. My son will never cause a scene again, he said. Claire nodded. And you don't have to be either, she replied without thinking too much about it. Etienne turned around in surprise, and a shadow of a smile appeared on his face. Tired, but real. Thank you, he said again, and this time it sounded different. Claire looked down, but no longer out of shame, but to protect what they were creating. Etienne opened the door for her to leave, and before Claire crossed the threshold, he said, "Sleep without fear tonight, you have my word." The next day, Claire woke up before the light had finished streaming through the window. It wasn't because someone was calling her, but out of habit, in an old fear. She sat on the edge of the bed and listened. There were no screams or running footsteps, just a palace breathing slowly, as if it too were waiting to see what would happen. There was a knock at the door. Claire got up immediately, smoothed her apron, and opened the door carefully. It was the valet, looking serious. Claire Dubois. Yes, sir, His Highness requests that you accompany him to the heir's breakfast. Claire blinked. To breakfast? Yes, and he asks you to enter through the front door, not the service entrance. Claire felt her stomach lurch. Not that. Not that. Today, yes, the valet interrupted without malice and advised her to walk as if she didn't have to apologize for breathing. Claire swallowed. Understood. As she walked through the corridors, she noticed that they no longer followed her with the same confidence as before. They looked at her, yes, but there was something different. Now they looked at her as one looks at a decision made by someone powerful. When she reached the heir's quarters, the guard opened the door without announcing her, as if she were a nuisance. Claire entered. Luis was sitting at the table with a cup of chocolate in front of him. His hair was combed, but he didn't look like a doll. He looked like a child who had finally fallen asleep. When he saw her, his eyes lit up. Claire, he said, and stood up without asking permission. Claire quickly crouched down to his height. Good morning, my prince. Luis hugged her tightly. Claire held him for only a moment, taking care to keep it brief, as was appropriate. But the boy's body trembled a little, as if to confirm that it was not a dream. He was standing in the background with some papers in his hand. When he saw her, he did not frown or stiffen, but simply said, Good morning, Claire. Good morning, Your Highness. Sit down, he said, pointing to a chair near Luis. Claire froze. Your Highness, sit down, he repeated. It's an order. Claire obeyed with her heart in her throat. Luis pushed a plate of sweet bread toward her, proud of himself. I saved some for you, he announced. He smiled shyly. Thank you. Luis picked up his cup and drank as if nothing had happened. I'm not going to choose today, he said suddenly, looking at his father. Right? Etienne put the papers down on the table. No. Luis pressed his lips together. They're not going to tell me to smile for people anymore. Etienne leaned forward slightly. Smile when you feel like it, he replied, not when you're told to. Luis breathed as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. So I can be sad. Claire felt a lump in her throat, but said nothing. She let his father answer. Yes, said Etienne. You can. Luis looked at Claire as if seeking confirmation. Claire nodded. Yes, my prince. Luis settled back in his chair, satisfied. Then he said with childlike seriousness, If anyone tries to kick you out, I'll say no. Claire touched his hand lightly, a minimal gesture. My prince, you don't have to fight alone. Luis frowned. Then who? Me, Etienne replied without hesitation. Me. Luis looked at him as if he wasn't used to hearing that word so clearly. Really? Really, said Etienne. Luis looked down at his chocolate and without looking at anyone whispered, Thank you. Claire felt her eyes moisten. She swallowed them with a sip of air. The calm did not last long. There was a knock at the door. Armand entered with a thick folder. Your Highness, he said quietly. Etienne took the folder and opened it. Claire did not look, but she could hear the weight of the paper. Everything is inventoried and sealed, said Armand de Sigon. Etienne nodded. Good, tell the Chancellor I'll see him in the small hall in 30 minutes. Yes, Your Highness. Luis raised his head. Important people again. Etienne stroked his hair with a strange, tender, clumsy, and sincere gesture. Yes, but they won't be using you today. Today I'll do the talking. Louis put the handkerchief in his pocket as if it were a good luck charm. Claire felt that handkerchief was like a whole story in a child's hand. When the time came, Etienne walked toward the small salon with firm steps. Claire followed behind him, because that was what she had been ordered to do. Louis did not go. Etienne had decided that the boy should stay quietly in his room with a book and without tutors. In the small hall were the Chancellor, two advisors, and of course the Duchess of Blair, who seemed to possess everything. The Duchess looked Claire up and down and smiled a smile that was like a needle. Her Highness greeted her with a slight bow of her head. "How thoughtful of you to bring her." Etienne did not return the greeting. "Sit down," he ordered, and sat down himself first. The Chancellor cleared his throat. "Your Highness, the court demands an explanation. The families of the noble ladies will receive a formal letter of thanks, an apology for exposing them to an undignified spectacle." The Duchess calmly opened her fan. "How dramatic. No one has exposed them. An opportunity presented itself. A child in mourning was used," corrected Etienne dryly. One of the advisors tried to soften the comment. "Your Highness, we understand your pain, but stability is sustained by truth." Etienne cut him off, "Not by theater." The Duchess bowed her head. "Then what do you propose?" "To raise an heir without a mother." Claire felt the impact of the phrase, but she did not move. Etienne looked calmly at the Duchess. "I propose that the heir be protected and that the palace stop pretending that a title is a mother." The Chancellor frowned. "Your Highness, there was talk of 5 candidates." "Why?" "Because you allowed it," Etienne replied. "And I allowed it too." "Not anymore." The Duchess let out a stifled chuckle. "And who is replacing him?" "The cleaning lady." Claire felt her face burn, but Etienne spoke before the atmosphere became tense. "Her name is Claire Dubois," said the Duchess, raising her eyebrows. "Ah, of course." Etienne opened Armand's folder and slid it toward the Chancellor. "Read," he said. The Chancellor opened it, read it, and his expression changed. He opened it, read it, and his expression changed. The advisors leaned in to see. The Duchess kept smiling, but she tightened her grip on her fan. "This," murmured the Chancellor. "This implies manipulation," said Etienne. "It implies pressure. It implies that the process was rigged before it even began." The Duchess closed her fan with a soft click. "Your Highness." "Not me. You will withdraw from this matter immediately and cease to mention Claire's name in a mocking tone," said Etienne without raising his voice. "If you cannot respect her, at least respect my word." The Duchess held his gaze. "You are threatening me," said Etienne without blinking. "I am setting a limit." The room fell silent. No one dared to breathe. The Chancellor finally spoke, choosing his words carefully. "Your Highness, if the ceremony is cancelled, there will be rumors. The people, the allies. There will be an act of mourning," replied Etienne. "A royal act, not a parade. We will honor the princess with grace and dignity, and it will be clear that the heir will not be used." One of the advisors nodded slowly. "That may work." The Duchess smiled coldly. "And the mother figure, because the need does not disappear with one act." Etienne glanced at Claire for a second. Claire felt that glance as a question. "Are you still standing firm?" Claire swallowed but did not back down. "There will be a figure of care," said Etienne. "Official, with a name, duties, and respect. Claire will be directly responsible for the daily welfare of the heir under my authority." The Duchess let out a soft, joyless laugh. "How convenient." Etienne leaned slightly toward her. "Convenient was your plan," he said. "This is necessary." The Chancellor took a deep breath. "If it is done this way, there will be resistance. A lot." "Let there be," replied Etienne. "I will support it." Claire felt something in her chest, a dangerous warmth. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something she didn't dare name. The meeting ended without shouting or scandal, only with decisions that weighed more than any gossip. As they left, the Chancellor approached Etienne in a low voice. "Your Highness, are you sure you want to put her so close? The court will follow." "I know," said Etienne. "That's why I'm putting her close, so they don't crush her." The Chancellor looked at Claire suspiciously. "Be careful." He said it as if caution were a favor he was doing her. Claire nodded curtly. "Yes, sir." When they were alone in the hallway, Etienne lowered his voice. Are you all right? Claire blinked. She wasn't used to a prince asking her that. I'm learning not to shrink, she replied, her voice sounding firmer than she expected. Etienne looked at her for a second, as if he liked that answer. Good, he said. That same day the palace prepared for the morning. It was not a party, but an honest silence. A short ceremony in the chapel with few guests, no hidden laughter, just candles, short prayers, and a space to remember without pretense. Claire entered with a heavy heart, not because of the chapel, but because of the looks from the others, that feeling of being out of place. Luis walked beside his father. He carried a silk handkerchief with embroidered initials in his hands. It was fine, embroidered, and with small initials. Claire recognized it from afar. It was something that had belonged to the princess. Louise clutched it as if she were holding it too. Before starting, Louise turned to Claire. They won't look at me badly today, said Claire. She smiled slightly. Today you owe nothing to anyone, replied Louise. He moved closer and lowered his voice. Can I sit with you? Claire froze. Etienne heard and answered for her. You can sit wherever you want, he said, and no one will judge you. Louise sat down next to Claire without letting go of the embroidered handkerchief. Some nobles opened their eyes wide, but no one said anything in front of the chapel. When the ceremony ended, the people dispersed in silence. There was no applause, only a strange respect, as if they had suddenly forgotten to be cruel in a sacred place. In a quieter corridor outside, Camille de Brisac approached Claire. Miss Dubois, he said with a slight bow. Claire was surprised. Madame, Camille whispered, today we saw what needed to be seen, that the child is a child and that you are not playing games. Claire clenched her fingers. I don't want to be the cause of anything. I haven't caused anything, Camille cut in. He just appeared when no one wanted to see him. Claire felt a lump in her throat. Thank you, said Camille. She nodded. Take care. The Duchess doesn't forget, but she's not in charge like she used to be. I know, Claire replied. Camille looked over at Etienne talking to an advisor and whispered, and he's not the same either. Claire didn't answer because if she did, it would be obvious. That afternoon, Etienne sent for Claire to a small room, far from prying ears. When Claire entered, he was standing by a window. He didn't have the stiffness of the council, he had human weariness. Is Lou all right? He asked. Yes, Claire replied. She ate and laughed a little with a book. Etienne exhaled. Thank you. Claire looked down out of habit, but he spoke immediately. Don't look down at me, he said gently. Claire stood still. Forgive me, Your Highness. Claire, he corrected her softly. Here with me. Just Claire. Claire felt her heart leap. Your Highness, Etienne insisted, taking a step closer. Only when we're alone. Claire swallowed, looked up, and for the first time saw him without the invisible crown. She saw a man who had lost something and was trying to get it back. Etienne spoke slowly. Today, when I saw him sitting with you in the chapel, I understood something that I was afraid to understand. Claire couldn't speak. She just waited. It's not just that my son needs you. It's that I need you too. Claire felt her knees buckle, but she held herself steady. Etienne tried out the name as if it didn't quite fit in his mouth. He moved a little closer without touching her. I don't want this to be a rumor, he said. I don't want it to be a favor. I want it to be a clean choice. Claire took a deep breath. What are you talking about? Etienne stared at her. I want to marry you, Claire. The world went blank. Claire opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Then it did, but it came out shaky. That's going to set the court on fire. Let it burn, Etienne replied without raising his voice. I've spent years putting out other people's fires. This time I want to light something worthwhile. Claire felt her eyes moisten, but not as a sign of weakness, but of relief. I'm not, she began. Don't ever tell me you're not, Etienne interrupted, his voice breaking. Tell me what you are. Claire swallowed. I'm a woman who has lived in hiding, she said quietly, who learned not to ask, who learned not to expect. Etienne slowly reached out his hand, as if asking for permission without saying so. Claire hesitated for a second and then placed her hand in his. The contact was simple, but Claire's body reacted as if it could finally rest. Then I ask one thing of you, Etienne said. Don't hide anymore. Claire looked at him, her throat tight. I already told you, she whispered. I don't want to be a secret. You won't be, he replied. I want to introduce you as my wife, and I want you to choose that too. Not for Luis, not out of fear, but for yourself. Claire squeezed his hand. I choose it, she said, surprised at how firm she sounded. But on one condition. I won't mock her, said Etienne. I'll just wait. The princess's memory must be respected, said Claire. I'm not going to compete with a dead woman. I don't want Louis to feel that his mother has been erased. Etienne nodded, serious. Never, he said. My wife was loved and will be honored. You're not here to erase. You're here to accompany us as we continue living. Claire shed a tear that she couldn't wipe away in time. Etienne raised his other hand and, with a delicacy Claire hadn't expected, touched her cheek with his fingers, as if to confirm that she was real. I'm not going to ask you for more strength than you already have, Claire whispered. She took a breath. Then don't let go of me when the stares begin. I won't let go, said Etienne, and this time he did bring her closer, just enough to rest his forehead against hers for a moment. It wasn't a grand scene, it was a silent pact. The next day, Etienne made the announcement in the main hall. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wonder what they would think. He said it as if he were establishing a new order. The court was assembled. The 5 noble ladies were present, sitting with dignity, some with resentment and others with relief. The Duchess of Béclier was also there, with a stiff smile. Claire didn't want to go in. She felt her body shrink. They're going to stare at me, she thought, and Etienne squeezed her hand. Let them stare, he said. You walk. Louis walked ahead with a proud stride, stopped in the middle of the hall, and turned to the people with a serious expression. Good morning, and he said as he had been taught, but without a mask. The court responded. Then Etienne spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, he said in a firm voice, my son will no longer be paraded around to calm the anxieties of others. A murmur ran through the room. Etienne did not stop. The election ceremony is canceled. I apologize to the families of the ladies for allowing a situation that did not honor either mourning or respect. The noble ladies looked at each other. Camille lowered his gaze. Adele pressed her lips together. Margot listened without blinking. Elodia seemed relieved. Sabine was stiff with anger. Etienne continued. However, he went on, the palace needs clarity, and it will have it. He took Claire's hand and raised it slightly, as if it were a trophy, but only so that her presence would be noticed. This is Kicker Dubai. A heavy silence fell. Claire felt the blood rushing to her ears. She wanted to let go of his hand, but Louis moved closer and stood by her side as if he were her shield. He spoke more calmly. My son chose her that day because he treated her like a child, not like a symbol. I have seen her character, her prudence, and her kindness, and I have decided that she will be part of this family. The Duchess stepped forward. Your Highness, Etienne interrupted her without looking at her. Furthermore, he said, and then he looked at everyone. I have asked for her hand, and Claire has accepted. I have asked for her hand, and Claire has accepted. The court was filled with whispers. Claire felt her face burning, not out of embarrassment, but out of fear that this moment would turn into an attack. But Etienne did not lower his voice, he kept it steady. Anyone who has objections, let them be presented through formal channels. Anyone who seeks to humiliate or defame will face my authority. This is not to be discussed as gossip. Louis suddenly spoke in a clear voice, and that silenced more than any decree. I want her to be my family, he said, and I'm not afraid to say it. Claire felt her heart break with tenderness. Camille de Brissac stood up. His movement was discreet but visible. I offer my respects to your Highness and to Miss Dubois, he said in a firm voice. That gesture opened a crack. Others, out of prudence or humanity, bowed their heads. Not all, but enough. The Duchess did not smile. She just stood still, trapped in a defeat she could not express. The following days were spent in quiet preparations. Claire insisted on something, and Etienne complied. The ceremony would be intimate and respectful, without mockery or spectacle. When the day arrived, Claire trembled as she adjusted her dress. It wasn't the dress that frightened her, but the idea of facing the world without being able to hide. The chief of staff, who had questioned her at the beginning, entered the room and looked at her as if she didn't know what to say. "You're pale," she finally blurted out. Claire tried to smile. "I feel like I'm going to fall." The chief crossed her arms, uncomfortable. "Well, don't fall," she said, then lowered her voice. "And if you do fall, make sure it's upward." Claire looked at her in surprise. That was advice. The chief snorted. "It's the only advice I know how to give." Claire let out a nervous giggle. "Thank you." Etienne was waiting for her in the chapel. He didn't greet her coldly, but with a look that seemed to say, "Here you are." Finally. Louis was standing nearby, carefully holding his mother's embroidered handkerchief. When Claire saw it, her throat tightened. Louis approached her and spoke softly. "I brought it so she could be here too," he said. Claire bent down to his level. "Thank you, my prince," she whispered. "That's love." Louis became serious. "And you love me too," he said as if it were a fact. Claire looked him in the eyes. "Yet," she replied, "with everything I know." Louis finally smiled without anyone asking him to. The ceremony was short, clear words, simple promises. Etienne took Claire's hands and spoke in a firm but emotional voice. "Claire Dubois, I choose you shamelessly. I choose you with respect, and I promise that no one will ever make you feel small in this house again." Claire felt her voice break, but she didn't hide it. "I choose you with truth, not to save you from court, but to walk with you without fear. I promise to care for Louise with patience and to care for you with honesty." Etienne squeezed her hands as if that contact would sustain him. When he finished, he did not kiss her as in the exaggerated stories. He kissed her forehead delicately, and that gesture for Claire was stronger than any theatrical gesture, because it was respect turned into tenderness. Louise stepped between them and took their hands, one from each, as if closing a circle. "There," he said with satisfaction. "We are." Claire let out a laugh that came out between tears. "Yes," she murmured, "we are." That night, in a small room far from the court, Etienne approached Claire with a new calm. "Are you still afraid?" he asked. Claire thought of the list with her name on it, of the corridors, of the folded paper, of the public humiliation, and then of Louise asleep without crying, of the simple ring and the promise made. "Yes," she confessed, "but it's not the same fear anymore." Etienne gently cupped her face with both hands. "What is it then?" he asked. Claire smiled tremulously. "It's the fear of being happy," she said, "because I don't know how to live when you're no longer being hunted." Etienne embraced her slowly, as if teaching her with his body what words take time to learn. "You live one day at a time," he whispered, "and if you tremble, tremble with me." Claire closed her eyes for a moment and, for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to rest in someone without fear of losing them. Later, when all was quiet, Claire peeked into Louise's room. The boy slept with the embroidered handkerchief folded next to his pillow and the cotton one in his hand, as if both worlds could fit there. Then Etienne appeared behind her. "He's at peace," Claire said. He nodded. "Yes." Etienne brushed her hand gently. "And you are at peace, Orman." Claire stared at Louise for another second. Then she turned to Etienne and smiled broadly, even though her lips were trembling. "I'm learning," she said, "and I don't want to live in fear anymore." Thank you very much for listening to this story to the end. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed telling it. We would love to hear your opinion. Leave us a comment telling us where you are listening from and what you liked most. Rate this story from 1 to 10. What score would you give it? If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a sign of support. That motivates us a lot to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotions and lessons. Before we say goodbye, we want to remind you that a recommendation for another exciting and charming story will appear on the final screen. If you want to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you again for being here. See you in the next story.